Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm not as practiced on my yo-yo, with not as much touring going on. It's not as much opportunity. Thanks, Cassidy, for playing as well. That was really beautiful. Um, I am very happy to be here, very happy and stressed. The Vancouver Mural Festival is about 2 weeks away. We're producing over 60 murals in 9 neighborhoods across Vancouver, launching a new app and a number of other things. My wife and I are renovating our place, so we've moved back in with my parents, with our 2-year-old daughter. And then additionally, just because I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm also in the process of releasing an album right now and new music. I had a new song come out today. So, and then obviously COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So when I was approached about Creative Mornings, I had a lot of responses that were like, "Oh, I'm so busy. Things are so hectic. I have a lot on my plate." Um, and then Mark Bussey said, "Oh, well, the theme's stress, so now you actually have to do it." And so here I am, happy and stressed to be here. I want to preface what I'm going to say with a couple things, two things. First of all, when I do talks like this, I do have this sort of feel this pressure to be experty. That's the word I'm going to use, and provide kind of like wisdom or like a quote that, you know, you can take away and write in cursive writing, across a picture of the sunset, and it'll say like, uh, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life or whatever. I'm not an expert. I'm just me. And today I'm just going to be talking a bit about my reflections on my experiences with stress and creativity in my own life, and ways in which I've been ongoing trying to understand it and how it shows up in ways that I don't really know as it's showing up. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not more stressed than everybody else. This isn't a talk for me to say, I am the most stressed. I have all the things happening. I'm so stressed. Let me tell you how stressed I am. That's really not my intention. Everybody is stressed, especially right now in 2020. We're in a giant stressy boat together. So I just want to like pay respect to that everyone is experiencing stress in their lives. Um, I do. So I do have a personal relationship with stress, and that's where I want to start. I have struggled with depression and anxiety for as long as I can remember, and it's shown up in ways that I didn't always understand, and mostly didn't understand. And it could be paralyzing. It could be damaging to myself, to things I cared about, to people I cared about, and created a ton of habits that were to cope with it that weren't necessarily the most healthy. So, but I didn't really fully start to grasp what was going on for me, and that was the case until I'd say about 6 years ago. I was going through a particularly difficult bout of depression and started doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and I was diagnosed with an obsessive anxiety disorder. Um, and I remember sitting across from the therapist, and they said, "Look, there's um, because the high level is essentially coming from social anxiety and perfectionism." And I remember the therapist saying, there's two types of perfectionists in the world. There's people who want to be perfect, and people who want everyone to think they're perfect. And I said, "Okay, well, which one do you think I am?" And she said, "I actually think you might be both." And it was, a difficult moment, but maybe one of the best moments in my life, because I was able to put a name to something that had been emanating throughout my life, and I couldn't put my finger on for so long, and definitely affecting my creativity as well and interplaying with that. So it was pretty powerful. It really, and the way it changed things was it like changed my fundamental understanding of like everything, like how I had experienced things, experiences I'd had when I was younger, and things I was going through at the time. Some really simple examples being, when I found out that procrastination is a telltale sign of unhealthy perfectionism, And I'm sure a lot of people on here are like, yeah, we know that already, but I didn't know that. So when I was told that, my brain was like, um, it's changed so much for me. A really literal example with my creative life in music is realizing that, why I became so involved and so passionate about music and songwriting early on as a kid was, I thought I was just trying to impress girls, but really I've realized now that uh, it was a refuge. It was an escape for me from the stress, the anxiety, the pressure that I felt. Um, so now what it allowed me to do was it was making the world small. It was allowing me to sort of turn things down and like focus. And it actually was creating space for me to be creative and to feel momentum and to build that energy. And I'm someone who loves to collaborate. So when I say make the world small, I don't mean like I don't want to talk to anyone, but I love to collaborate with people. I love to build and create. So it gave me the space to do that. Now, the irony is, as I did that, I entered into this cycle, which I would then see over and over, repeat over and over in my life. That was find this space and then start building until I've now opened up to the world again and brought in a lot of those. That process is bringing in a lot of those stressors that I was sort of escaping in the first place. And just to clarify, when I talk about sort of I was escaping this, or I was, I didn't really know that's what I was doing. It's just was sort of what was happening under the surface. It's something I've sort of come to terms with now. And so what happened is it became, I mean, obviously this is almost addictive. This is like, this is the way I'm allowing myself to get into this creative space, to feel creative, to feel like comfortable and be myself and away from these stressors. So it becomes like ingrained in my personality, and it's not just something I do. Music wasn't something I just did. It was my identity, just totally linked. So what that does is it like raises the stakes dramatically. You end up, and actually, Mark, you can change to the next slide. So this is, sorry, I forgot. This is 13-year-old me with my first guitar, and finding that happy place. But what it did is it really turned up the stakes a lot. It really, because everything, and this is my identity. It's not just what I'm doing. So it was hard to process. And as my band started to expand and do more and more and more, it was exposing me back to the world coming in and things like people's opinions, unsolicited advice, criticism, and myself being probably one of the hardest critics, and of course optionality. And the optionality is really stressful because it's so important. The stakes are so high. And when I was younger, really feeling like, oh, there is a right decision. I have options and I have to make the right decision. Or I will suffer the consequences. So even like having the right poster, choosing the right synth sound in the studio, or bigger, career goals, it seemed really stressful. So you can go to the next slide, Mark. You see a picture, like the next one, and with my band, and it's like, what is every person in this room thinking of me right now and of what I'm doing? These kinds of things would come into my head. And over 15 to 20 years of doing music, and in the rest of my career, social media became a thing, and the access to me and my access to people's thoughts was drastically increased. So anyway, so what's happening is I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I create this space to, constraints to make myself feel comfortable and get back into the creative mojo. I don't know why I just used the word mojo, but, and now I'm building, and now I'm back in the place where I wasn't feeling super comfortable again, and that stress is coming back in. So I started to find myself back in with these, depression and anxiety and these habits that were, somewhat were damaging. And I was looking for, just like another way of building constraints. And I would find that in a practical way, say in the studio, of, creating a container to say, okay, here's, it's this studio, this amount of time, this kind of thing. That allowed me to feel comfortable. But on a bigger level, I was looking for it. And I really found it in working in service of others and in service of causes and things that I really believed in, and using my creativity in service of other people's creativity. And so that started with producing in the studio, but it also moved into founding a fundraiser with my wife for St. James Music Academy, which is an incredible charity here in Vancouver that does music lessons for kids on the downtown east side who can't afford lessons. And so you can go to the next picture, Mark. So doing that created a space, once again, for me to feel creative, allowed me to be collaborative. You know, it helped me build up that momentum again, that creative momentum. So then this pattern repeats itself, and, fast forward from this, and I am on a much bigger scale doing this kind of work with Vancouver Mural Festival and Create Vancouver Society. And if you go to the next slide, Mark, scaling this up into public art and public space. And the Mural Festival, we do a lot of work aside from just the festival in August. And also, we're not just throwing parties and putting paint on walls. When you work in public space, I mean, this is really letting the world back in. This is it's shared space. It can be contentious. You're opening yourself up to the work up to scrutiny, rightfully so, to opinion, and also it's an intersectional space. I mean, it's everyone's space. It's an intersectional space. So it's basically like, you're dealing with issues of, obviously making public art on unceded territory. You're looking at people's sense of safety, sense of identity, personal and community identity, visibility for people, communities, stories, histories that haven't had that kind of visibility, systemic issues. There's so much that's brought into the work that we do. Once again, this is incredibly personal work for me. So like with music, the stakes are very high. And because it's this constant learning space, learning, unlearning, adapting, that's not just happening for the organization, it's also happening for me personally. And that's work that has to happen for me personally to be, authentic but it just has to, because it's an extension of my own identity. So, and as I face that work in this public forum, this personal work, it can create a lot of stress. And I think for anyone, any background who wants to engage with large issues like the ones I spoke about, or, systemic inequality and racism and so on, and dissecting your own role in it and how you're connected to it and how to move forward in that space, it can be daunting. It can be really daunting for anybody. And so once again, I find myself, and the organization finds itself, finding these opportunities to create constraints and dive in specific spaces so that we can build momentum, and I can build momentum personally to continue to engage and grow in that way. So the reason what I want to review with everything I've just talked about is, I've just talked about all these things that have, brought me anxiety and stress, and I haven't talked about how busy I am. And that's because I feel that a lot of the stress that I experience as a creative person doesn't come from how busy I am as much. Not to say it doesn't, but not as much as it comes from how much I care about the work that I do and how much a part of me it is. And even when I take things off my plate, I end up filling myself up with this work in a way that can cause a lot of stress. So my last slide for you is my sunset slide. And I know people say when you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. But I will say maybe additionally, when you care about what you do, you end up working every day of your life. And you don't get to clock out. You don't, I wake up with my work. I spend my day with it. I go to sleep with it. I wake up in the middle of the night with it. I mean, it's because it's part of me. And I think for creatives in general, I would think, from my experience, it feels pretty apt. And the reason why I think this is important, at least from my perspective, is that if this is true for you, like it is for me, and you're trying to understand how to cope with stress, reduce stress, channel your stress into your work and in your life, the approaches that you're going to want to take to doing that might actually shift if this is the case. It's different for you if the stress is coming from what you care about and how much you care about the work you're doing and how much a part of you it is, than if it comes from, I just have so many things on my plate. And the tools are different for everyone. And anything with cognitive behavioral therapy, I've learned that you have to try things and figure out what works for you. But I just think the tools you might use to interact with stress and your creativity might be different if this is the case for you. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. And hopefully there's been something that resonates here for you. I appreciate the chance to fire hose you all with my my story and all the things that have been going on in my head for a number of years. But I hope there's something here that resonates for you, and thanks so much for having me.
We are now going to open it up to some questions. If you haven't done so already, please submit a question to either David or Cassidy in the chat, and we'll select a few to ask our guests. And I think the chat should be reopened, so that should be possible. Just double checking.
Chat is live.
Great. And maybe I'll go first while people...
I've also, by the way, Renat, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I also have re-enabled the ability for people to unmute themselves. So I'll disable spotlight video, and if somebody feels strongly they have a question, feel empowered now and encouraged to unmute yourself and hop forward and engage our speaker with your question.
Okay. But I would like to go first, if I may. So this is actually a question for both David and Cassidy, and I found that there was some really interesting crossovers in what you shared today. And so the question is, in your experience, what is your relationship of stress to your self-growth? And especially as an artist, musician, and people who, really believe in authentic presence. David and Cassidy, are they?
I have to unmute myself. I think actually Cassidy we were in the breakout room together, and she was just talking about this. And just like we were saying how like when you are trying to, as an artist, trying to create and trying to be authentic and trying to sort of develop, and you have to, but you want that to be your profession, and the pressure to do that on demand. And then also, you read these books and they're like, you should be working every day and you should be, and it's just like, and then you go into this cycle of like, if I can't do that, then I must not be a real artist. Like there's a lot of sort of self-shame and self-loathing stuff. But I don't know, Cassie, maybe could expand upon that.
Yeah. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, especially during the pandemic, and I haven't figured it all out. I don't have all the answers for that, but I am becoming a lot more aware of it, and I think that pinpointing the fact that I do feel that shame when I'm not, inspired on cue, and I'm not ready to like be in the zone all the time, every day. 8 a.m. I'll sit down and write a song. It sometimes I can manage to do that, and sometimes I can't. And I think that's just part of it. Like, I think I'm just realizing that, I can learn tools to deal with stress, and I can learn tools to kind of get myself out of a shame spiral. Um, and yeah, I'm in the learning process.
You also like, I feel like you need to, like, for on a personal sort of learning and side, there's lots of stuff that I'm dissecting and understanding and learning on learning, and I think it's something you definitely have to learn to give yourself space to do that. And also, I think I talked about like trying to create containers to work in, small spaces, like somewhere to start, and you can't always, you can't do it all at the same time. You know what I mean? So you can't solve systemic racism all at once as one person for yourself, and you can't, as an artist, it's like coming into this situation being like, okay, today I'm going to write an entirely fully formed song, and then I'm going to produce it, as opposed to coming to space to be like, I'm just going to come up with some creative ideas. Like, I'm going to come up with, some cool musical ideas I think are interesting. Like that, those expectations of yourself are setting yourself up for success rather than setting yourself up for failure.
Exactly.
And so that really, something like that can really, biting off a piece that you can handle is actually in the end going to help you be more successful, because you can build momentum. You can go from there when you're feeling like, okay, I can do this. Then when you're like, oh my God, there's just too much and I'm expecting so much of myself right now, right here.
And when when I do put those expectations so high for myself, that's often when the stress gets the better of me and I don't end up as productive or creative. It's usually or satisfied. Yeah. So when I find a way to take the pressure off and just kind of feel like, okay, I'm stepping into the room, I'm going to just be present and see what comes to me and work on that, then that's usually, when the magic happens, for lack of a better phrase.
That's awesome. Thank you. So this is kind of related question from Cass Herenkow. Have you ever felt almost immobilized by stress, and how did you get out of that mind space?
Yes, I have. I think kind of back to what I was saying, which is like just trying, for me, a really, a tool I've used over and over again, and not even necessarily consciously, has been to, like I said, create these creative constraints in some ways, but biting off a piece that I can, what can I do? For instance, when starting this fundraiser, Sing It Forward, that my wife and I ran for a number of years, that stemmed from conversations about like, arts policy and access to arts and programs in schools and all ages venues. And like, there was this big sort of thing that was weighing down and being like, oh my God, how do you even engage on this and make a difference or whatever? And my wife was the one who said like, look, you just got to do like something you can do. You just have to start there. Like, just give yourself the grace to do something, make a list, start with what you can start with, what's in front of you. And take it one piece at a time. I mean, for me, that's definitely one of my go-to tricks, is to kind of like, in some ways, like, you have to shut a bunch of the things that are stressing you out and just focus on what you can focus on, one thing at a time.
Mm-hmm. I've been finding personally that what happens to me when I get really overwhelmed and start to really stress out or panic is that I really disconnect from my body. And I've never been very good at being fully present in my body. So learning whatever kind of works to get myself back in, whether that's meditation or yoga, or I've been working with different types of energy healing, like acupressure points that really get me grounded again. And then I can breathe and then come at the situation from a more rational perspective.
Oh yeah, cool. Thank you. Hi, thank you to both of you. I also just posted this in the chat because I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. And this may be tagging on the question of what was just answered, but this is mostly for Cassidy, but for both of you, I suppose, is just around the topic of grief. And with Cassidy specifically, I bring it up because it's just
it's big for me in my own life right now, was something super dark and memory related. And my trauma journey has been a lot. And I've just been rendered incapacitated by grief creatively. I got nothing. Like, I got nothing. And I want so much to create. And I hear such beautiful music in what you had written. And I'm just curious, how did you get there? Like, how do you push through the grief and create out of it? Yeah, that's it.
That is such a good question, and thank you so much for sharing and for asking. I, you know, it took me a long time to get there. I think I wrote that song 10 years after my mom passed away, and I really resonate with that feeling of just feeling like completely paralyzed by it, because I feel like a lot of the time as creatives, our inspiration and creativity comes from these deep places. It comes from our strongest, deepest feelings and our most vivid, for lack of a better word, haunting memories. So, when you have these kind of, big traumas that you have experienced and that are really sticking with you, it may not feel safe yet to go there, or you may not have a way in that feels safe. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, but I've for me really it was time, but now that I have a few more tools, I've just been finding ways to kind of ease myself into it and kind of safely access these memories as best I can, whether that's working with a therapist, which I've done multiple times, different types of therapy, or just breathing, or again, something physical like yoga, or simple breathing exercises, and just touch a little bit at a time and see how much you can handle, and go easy on yourself, like.
Also, like, knowing that, at least in my experience in songwriting, like some of the most, the songs that have come out of trauma for me and difficult situations, and depression, when I start to work on them, they feel almost like embarrassing. Like, it's like, really, there's like this embarrassment, and you're just like, it feels strange, and then but it is cathartic as well. And it's weird to say that, like, just like, for instance, a song I recorded was very, very personal, and I almost didn't put it on my record because it felt too personal, and I've actually felt like people wouldn't understand, and it would be, I'd be embarrassed, and actually what I did find in the end was it's been a song that's resonated with people on a level that a lot of my other music maybe hadn't even, because I think there's a universality of experience for people, and you think it's easy to close yourself. It's not easy, but I just mean the instinct is to close yourself in and be like, this is me, I am alone in this. Mm-hmm. But human beings are all over are going through grief and going through really difficult things, and as an artist, knowing that when you're able to dive into that in an honest and true way and bring that into the world, it's not just therapeutic for yourself, it's the way it touches other people. It feels like someone's, and I feel this way about a number of artists too, where you go like, how did they know? Like, those are my deepest, most personal thoughts, and they know. So there's sort of a universality of experience that I've seen when I have allowed myself to go there. So, mm-hmm. But I agree with Cassidy that it's something you have to take lightly, and hi, Megan, also. And yeah, so I think you have to be careful with yourself with that stuff, because it is really vulnerable, but try and create the space to go there, because that's kind of where the most amazing art and creativity lies, is in that really, really personal place.
Thank you. I'm just kind of tracking time, so I think we have just enough time for one more question. We have a question from Ola. Sorry, not going to try and pronounce the last name. David and Cassidy, I can procrastinate too when my fear of failure is just too high and blinding. How do you break the cycle, find the strength within yourself, and just get started?
Fear of failure. I mean, yeah, it's a big one. And I'm sure Cassidy would agree. In music, it's a massive one. And it's tied to, like I said, your identity of self, like who you're, like, this is who I am. So failure at what I'm doing is failure of me as a human being. So it definitely is something I've seen or I've experienced. You know, I think one tool that I've started to use through the cognitive behavioral therapy stuff I've done has been to try and do a sort of like exposure therapy where you're this is something that I thought was interesting that I learned from my time doing that, was if you were to take all the things that give you anxiety from and rate them on a scale of 1 to 100, you know, and let's say 70 is where you just literally cannot do it anymore. You are completely paralyzed. It's just not going to happen. There's actually studies and evidence to show that if you are able to tackle things that are lower down on that anxiety level in the 10s and the 15s, it actually will help lower the anxiety about everything from 1 to 100. Everything starts to shift down because you're giving yourself this exposure to anxiety and to that process. And you do it in a kind of a scientific way where you say, okay, like, what do I think is, you know, what's going on in this situation? What do I think is going on? What do I think is going to happen? What do I think, you know, failure looks like? What people are going to say, how I'm going to feel. You lay that out, you write it out. And then you do it. And you do something that's accessible to you, not the crazy thing you're scared about. You do, like, I did a thing where, I hope my parents aren't in here because I don't think I've told them this, but I did a thing where I actually, I canceled plans with my parents at the last minute. That was the thing I chose to do. I just said, I can't come, and I didn't give a reason. I just said, I need to take time for myself right now, which is something I'm very bad at doing. And I wrote down what I thought they'd say, how I thought they'd feel, how I thought I'd feel. And I thought, oh, they're going to be so upset and they're going to be mad at me and disappointed and I'm going to feel shame and blah, 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 you know, something so simple. And then on the other side of it, I wrote down what actually happened. And that is, first of all, that sometimes what you think is going to happen and what failure is doesn't happen. It doesn't look like that. The other thing that happens is, yeah, they are disappointed and things do happen, but it doesn't affect you in the way that you thought it would. So if you're able to start building up some of those experiences for yourself and try to, you know, put that into practice, you start to build up a repertoire of experiences that you can apply. And I think with failure, you know what failure is. I mean, it's something that we are defining for ourselves. So those kinds of experience can really help think about what failure means and realize, well, maybe it isn't actually what I think it is. When it actually happens.
Thank you. Cassidy, did you have anything to add?
I've done very similar exercises to you, and I think that I think you nailed it. I think the strategy of kind of taking the worst case scenario of what you're stressed and anxious about, the thing that's paralyzing you, and I agree, start with the smaller things and lay out the worst case scenario and look at that. Like, okay, well, if that happened, how would I feel? And then you kind of work your way backwards a little bit. And usually what I realize is that, okay, well, that wouldn't really be that bad, even if the worst case scenario happened. And like, okay, what else could happen? And you lay out some other not worst case scenarios. And even that exercise alone usually helps lower the anxiety. And then when you take some action, if you're able to, with the smaller things first, you usually see that it isn't as bad. And if you rate your stress on a level of 1 to 10, I found, and keep kind of checking in with it, you'll see that it will come down the more you kind of shine a light in the dark. You know, something is a lot scarier when it's in a dark corner and you can't see it than when you shine a light on it.
I think one thing I just want to add is, like, failure in a lot of cases for people feels like letting people down. It's like disappointing people, I think, is a really like, oh, I've let people down. I've let other people down. I let my coworkers down, my friends, my family, myself. And I think starting to work on the fact that, like, when you really think about it, like, are you going to go through life and not disappoint anybody? And is disappointment a normal part of life? And it isn't always about you. It's also about other people's expectations. I mean, this just giving yourself permission, the fact that sometimes you're going to disappoint people and they're going to disappoint you. And that's not anyone's fault. When people are showing up, trying to do their best, trying to be there, doing the work, you know, you've got to give yourself that grace that, like, sometimes you're going to let people down, and that's okay. That's just like, that is life. You just can't go through life and not disappoint a single person. Like, that's just, that's crazy when you think about it. But when you're in the moment, you don't think that way. You're just like, oh my God, I can't, if I disappoint.
So true. So true. Yeah. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. That was an amazing Q&A session. I really wanted to go on, but we're running out of time. So we have to wrap up. But I wanted to thank everybody for the beautiful questions. And then, of course, David and Cassidy for showing up with such vulnerability and openness and being able to talk about some of this really, you know, deep stuff that we carry around with us. So thank you very much.